They created something that will never be forgotten. Two closest friends are transforming abandoned trash into treasure while driving over America's back roads. However, behind the scenes, everything were collapsing while American pickers flourished on television. The friendship between Frank Fritz and Mike Wolfe was eroded by years of friction and quiet until it finally broke down. The heartbreak followed. Frank died. The fans were devastated. Shortly later, though, an odd rumor began to circulate online, one that took everyone by surprise. It was being said that Mike Wolfe had been sentenced in relation to Frank's death. Is this possible? Was a much deeper secret concealed by this once loved friendship? Or had the internet once more mistaken fiction for reality? Not only is what you're about to hear unexpected, most folks never saw that aspect of the narrative. Frank Fritz and Mike Wolfe weren't merely paired for television, you see. In fact, they have a very long history. Long before cameras, road trips, or antiques were ever considered. It was in middle school that these two first met. When 1982 finally arrived, they were crossing the same high school graduation stage. In the early 2000s, Mike had already fallen in love with picking and made the decision to begin chronicling his travels. He purchased a camera for himself, mounted it directly on the dashboard, and began filming while he went from town to town in search of undiscovered gems. Slowly, the concept began to grow into something more significant. Together, they began presenting those early movies to several networks when he invited Frank to appear on camera with him. However, it didn't happen right away. Before anyone ultimately bit, it took roughly 5 years of pitching and grinding. After a while, the History Channel saw something noteworthy. Mary Donahue of the network told the Des Moines Register that they enjoyed that the show wasn't confined to a store. The fact that Mike and Frank were traveling and seeing new and unusual locations across America gave the show a new lease on life. Frank actually had a fairly steady job selling firefighting equipment at the time. Mike wasn't exactly seeking to get into television, but he wasn't going to accept rejection. Thunder Press claims that Mike had to work hard to persuade him to quit that position and take a chance on the show. However, it obviously paid off. American Pickers was one of those shows that was simple to adore for more than 20 years. Viewers watched Mike Wolfe and Frank Fritz bike around small-town roadways and back roads week after week, appearing in abandoned storage containers, dirty garages, and dilapidated barns. The idea was straightforward. In the most unlikely places, two lifelong friends with an eye for antiques find hidden treasures. Danielle Colby oversaw the logistics and maintained the seamless operation of their home base behind the scenes. The trio worked together to turn a modest concept into one of the History Channel's biggest blockbusters. However, the show that so many people grew up watching began to deteriorate gradually. Additionally, there was no grandiose statement or dramatic departure. In front of everyone, it was more akin to something that slowly and silently came apart. In 2020, the crack first became apparent. Season 21 initially appeared to be going according to plan. Frank and Mike were still traveling, picking, and going about their daily business as usual. Burlesque Queen was the next episode. In March of that year, it was broadcast, and it ended up being Frank Fritz's final appearance on the show. He vanished after just one Ghost of the West episode. No warning, no justification. Even stranger was the fact that no one on the show discussed it. Not Danielle, not Mike. Frank seemed to have disappeared overnight, and everyone was expected to accept this. Now, 2020 was an odd year for all of us. It wasn't until January 2021 that American Pickers returned with a new season. When COVID shut down production schedules, fans began to notice that Frank was still gone when the show returned. It felt more and more like Frank's time on the show might actually be coming to an end because something wasn't right and someone else was taking his place on the road. Finally, in the summer of 2021, Frank spoke out. He made it plain in an interview. At least he didn't leave American Pickers on his own volition. He claimed that he required time to recuperate after back surgery. The epidemic then struck. The call never arrived, so he assumed he would simply return at the appropriate moment. But being excluded from the show wasn't the only thing that hurt. It was the quiet of someone he thought would be his friend for life. Frank claimed that even while Mike Wolfe was recuperating from surgery, he hadn't spoken to him in more than 2 years. Nothing, no text, no check-in. And that was particularly painful for someone he had worked with for decades. someone he had known before they were well known. Frank was battling his own issues on top of that. His condition was Crohn's disease, which he had endured for years. He had begun exercising, lost more than 65 pounds, and had even given up alcohol for about a year. Despite his efforts to change things, the one person he believed would get in touch with him didn't. In addition to his personal hurt, Frank began to express his annoyance at the changes made to the show. American Pickers, in his opinion, had turned into a Mike-centric show. Mike was like the frontman, the Steven Tyler of the operation, he said, drawing a comparison to a rock band. Frank didn't appear to be upset about that position. Although he acknowledged it, he made a suggestion that perhaps Mike was the one who was unable to handle being in the spotlight. The news then became official on July 21, 2021. In an interview with Entertainment Weekly, a History Channel representative verified what fans had been wondering for some time. American Pickers was the last game Frank Frits played, not only stepping back or taking a rest. There were no intentions to bring him back, and he was out. They said that he simply didn't match with the overall direction of the show. Now, it had been fairly calm until then. Frank had expressed his severe concerns about the way things ended between him and Mike Wolfe in a number of interviews. However, nothing. Mike eventually spoke up after the official announcement was made. He didn't address any of Frank's remarks or get involved in any of the drama. Rather, he kept it civil and light, wished Frank well, and described how they had begun this crazy journey together back in 2009, and how they had been brothers for eternity. He wished Frank the best of luck going forward and made it sound like a melancholy farewell, stating he would miss him just as much as the fans would. However, Danielle Colby, who has been a major contributor to American Pickers since the beginning, had a little more to say than Mike, who kept things professional and tactful. She made it apparent where her allegiances lay when she posted something on Instagram on August 2, 2021. As usual, she shared a picture of herself and Mike smiling while driving. She wrote in her statement that she was proud of Mike's handling of everything throughout the years, and that she was looking forward to many more experiences with him. She did not, however, ignore Frank. It was terrible to watch him go, she conceded, and whatever he was going through had not been pleasant to watch. However, one aspect of her statement caught my attention. Sometimes, she added, you have to take responsibility for your actions, particularly when they do harm to other people. It felt like a sharp line. Perhaps she was criticizing Frank's actions without mentioning his name. She even mentioned how much pain he was in, which could have been a reference to his drinking problems, which Frank had previously discussed in interviews, or perhaps even more intimate personal matters that the public is unaware of. When August 4th arrives, when 2021 arrived, Frank and Mike's conflict had greatly intensified, and not in the customary covert manner that gradually fades away. It felt strange. You see, Frank made it known even though it appeared that things had calmed down, as if the entire feud had simply paused. He wasn't finished. Not just in interviews, he told The Sun he still had some fight left in him. Fans supported him, and there was even a petition to have him return to the show. However, he was also not idly waiting for the phone to ring. Frank claimed that he could have just as much fun doing his own thing and finding a new show. Frank was also recuperating from extensive back surgery, by no means a trivial procedure, amid all the stress. 2 rods were inserted into his spine, and 185 sutures were made throughout the lengthy procedure. But his struggle was more than just the bodily pain. He disclosed in 2021 that he had willingly checked himself into the Abbey Center in Iowa to face his fight with alcoholism. He committed to a strict regimen and read over a dozen self-help books during his 77 days in therapy. This was more than just a sobriety attempt. It was so intimate. Alcoholism was a problem that both his mother and grandfather had struggled with and eventually died of. That resonated with him. Frank became serious throughout the period. He claimed to be focused, devoted, and he had been clean for almost a year at the time of that interview. Even though he continued to work and attend counseling twice a week, he longed to return to the life he had missed, traveling, discovering lost gems, and interacting with all the strange and fascinating individuals that came with the profession. Frank felt prepared, but many around him, particularly Mike Wolfe, weren't so convinced. When Mike did say something, it was somewhat ambiguous. He asserted that Frank was loved and desired by all members of the American Pickers team. But then the real conversation started. Frank, according to Mike, simply couldn't seem to do it right. Although he didn't specify what it was, his discussion of it made it quite evident. Although Mike said he would love to communicate with Frank again after a 2-year silence, he also intimated that Frank still had a lot of work to do in his rehabilitation. Frank was simply going through a lot psychologically and had made some difficult decisions that put him in his current situation. Then in July 2022, a serious shift came in Frank Fritz's life. When paramedics discovered him unconscious in his Davenport, Iowa, home, they hurried him to a neighboring hospital. Doctors there concluded that he had had a significant stroke. He was admitted to the hospital for a full month before being moved to a rehabilitation center due to the severity of his illness. That was only the beginning of what would turn out to be a protracted and difficult road to recovery. Frank's stroke had an impact beyond his physical health. It turned his life upside down. According to reports, his monthly care expenses came to almost $23,000. The court then stepped in and appointed a temporary guardian to manage his money and make sure he was okay. He needed help right now, and the situation was critical. Frank and Mike's tense friendship made things even more difficult. It had been a while since the two had been friendly, but after discovering Frank's condition, tensions from the past were forgotten. Mike requested supporters to keep Frank in their prayers after openly acknowledging his illness. He did not provide many specifics, but it was obvious that the news had a profound impact on him. Frank was still recovering by February 2023, while Mike was still dealing with the consequences of his absence. They had developed a bond that was hard to break after years of traveling together and searching through garages and barns. On and off the show, Mike freely admitted that the chemistry had shifted without Frank. He made it apparent that Frank's absence created a difficult-to-fill void. It seemed like Frank Fritz and Mike Wolfe had finally started to get back together, or at least rethink the prospect of repairing their broken relationship, after years of what looked to be silent tension and increasing distance. Over the 2023 Memorial Day weekend, something changed between Frank and the American Pickers set, even though he hadn't been there since 2020. The Quad City Times, who had a conversation with someone close to Frank, spread the word. They disclosed that Mike had been hoping to see Frank for some time, but they did not reveal their identities. All Frank needed was time. He was the one who stretched out, though, when he was at last prepared. When they got back together, their communication went beyond simple banter. They looked back at one of their biggest turning points, their 2011 appearance on The Late Show with David Letterman. As they pondered on their early days, feelings were strong. The reconnection was particularly meaningful to Frank, who is currently recuperating from his stroke. There were tears, real, sincere tears. The old connection seemed to have been re-established for a time. Frank was even informed by Mike that he would never be replaced. By giving subtle clues that Mike had been reminiscing about the good old days, before the fame and before the show truly took off, Frank's pals also appeared to be stoking the hopes of a reunion. It seems that Mike had expressed his desire to have Frank return to the show, but Frank's top priority was taking care of his health. But on October 1st, 2024, the lengthy and intricate tale of Frank Fritz and Mike Wolfe came to a silent, tragic end. Mike announced on Instagram that day that Frank had died the previous day, on September 30th, at the age of 60. Mike reflected in his message rather than only delivering the news. He discussed how he had known Frank for over half of his life, and how, behind the scenes, he was just the person that people saw on television. That friend you may lose touch with yet never truly let go of. A homage was also posted by Danielle Colby, who spent years sharing the screen with both of them. She talked about the little things, tattoos, laughter, and Frank's affection for his mother and his cat. Things like that were what bound them together. By referring to him as her road dog and bidding him farewell in the most sincere manner possible, she concluded her letter with both love and sadness. Now it spoke a lot that Mike was the one to announce Frank's death. They managed to return to something genuine before the end, despite all of their ups and downs, the stress and the protracted stillness following Frank's departure from American Pickers. Even though Frank's death at such a young age was devastating to both friends and admirers, It was reassuring to know that those old wounds appeared to be the last.